So, hello and welcome everyone to this Wendigoon video tier list. Now, I have always been a massive fan of Wendigoon's videos, and he was actually a major inspiration for starting this channel and making the sorts of videos that I make. So, I thought I would go through and rank every single one of Wendigoon's videos, and just have some fun exploring them a little bit. Before I recorded this video, I had watched a fair few of Wendigoon's videos, but I definitely hadn't watched all of them, and in the process of doing research for this video, I essentially had to, well, I didn't have to do anything, but I wanted to watch all of the videos that I hadn't watched of Wendigoon's, just so I could give a fair review of each and every one of them. And on the off chance that anyone watching this video doesn't know what a tier list is, it is simply a tiered list. So you have these tiers here, which are typically S to D, and you have a bunch of items down here at the bottom, which are whatever you're making the tier list about. Whatever they are, they all go at the bottom, and then you rank them based on your judgments, basically. And as you can see, I have added a F tier at the bottom just to stretch out the list a little bit, and the coveted Wendigoon tier right at the top. This tier is clearly above S tier, and it is reserved for some of the most special videos to me, or the ones that I think absolutely everyone should watch. The wording's a bit weird because every video is by Wendigoon, but it is what it is. And with a lot of tier lists, this is completely subjective. They are my opinions, and if you disagree with me on any of the placements, you are more than welcome to. Just let me know down in the comments below. And as well as being subjective, they are all also relative to Wendigoon's other videos. So videos in the F or D tier don't necessarily mean they are absolute horrible videos. It just means compared to some of Wendigoon's best stuff, they are clearly not quite as good. Again, in my opinion. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you guys are all comfortable and ready to go on this journey with me. So when you're ready, grab a drink. My choice today is coffee with milk with a spoon in it, apparently. And join me as we explore the Wendigoon videos tier list video. But first, a really quick thank you from my Patreon supporters. So to start off with, we have the Guntuber tier list. And this was, as far as I can see, Wendigoon's first ever video. It focuses less on the spooky, strange, and fascinating topics that he will cover in later videos, and more on the goon part of his name, Wendigoon, which, if you didn't know, is a combination of Wendigo and goon. Goon just meaning someone interested or fascinated with firearms. He ranks a bunch of Guntubers or YouTubers that work with firearms subjectively in a tier list, much like I'm doing in this video. Now, these bottom tiers need to get filled out with something, and since this video doesn't have the production quality, the interesting topics or editing, or depth of research that Wendigoon has in his later videos, this will have to sit comfortably in the D tier. Playing Black Ops 1 in 2020 is literally just Wendigoon playing Black Ops 1, giving some commentary on what he likes about mostly the plot. You can kind of see he's more interested in the story and the plot and the characters rather than the gameplay, which is kind of telling because he is a creator heavily focused on storytelling, and this one is just kind of him riffing, has even less production quality and research than the first one, if that's possible. So I don't think he will mind if I put it where it belongs, in the F tier. Not a great start, but things do get better. The Devil All the Time Explained and Analysis. The God in the Details. So this was Wendigoon's first venture or exploration into the type of videos that he would later make, i.e. those of storytelling, conspiracy, theories, not necessarily conspiracy theories, but both of them separately. He basically commentates over this film, explaining the plot of the film and how everything in the story ties together symbolically and narratively. A super fun one if you like symbolism, etc. But again, nowhere near the production quality or research of his later ones. So a solid C for Coolio Bagulio. Cursed gun images, but I have to say something nice. This one is just Wendigoon kind of ad-libbing and riffing on a cursed gun image video. Again, pretty fun because it is Wendigoon, but you kind of need to be interested at least somewhat in guns in order to enjoy it. And even then, the production quality is quite low and it's not very structured. I love the videos where your mind is blown or you learn something new or exciting, which Wendigoon does end up covering, but you don't really learn anything super interesting in this one, which is why I'm placing it in the F tier. Watching the best worst movie of all time is Wendigoon and Co. and and I don't know who Ko is, watching the film The Room and just commentating on some of the funniest parts of it. It's lighthearted, silly, low production. I don't think Wendigoon intended this to be one of his best works, so I don't think it should be taken that seriously. D tier. The true horror of Local 58. Now, before this, Wendigoon wasn't called Wendigoon. He went by Boogaloo Boy, which is... yeah. This was his first video that really focused on the scary, spooky side of things, and it honestly really shows in the views, which it did incredibly well compared to all of the videos before it. Local 58 is an incredible, very cryptic, very scary, very eerie, augmented reality game that has this strange alternate history and reality of the Earth that Wendigoon explores and goes over really quite well. It consists of a series of videos that are all somewhat subtle, but I think the subtlety just makes them even creepier. They're all kind of like psychological, eerie horrors as opposed to traditional horrors or jump scares. But in this story, the US has been attacked by an unnamed force and has been basically completely taken over and defeated. The story kind of comes out bit by bit as the videos go along, but it's still quite subtle and you still need to piece together a few of the puzzle pieces. I absolutely love strange, eerie, puzzly stories that make you think, and that also come with a ton of alternate theories and potential outcomes. And Local 58 does just that. So this will be the first S tier video in the list. Not there. Here. The Brilliance of the Lighthouse and the Terror of Imagination. This was the second Halloween spooky video that Wendigoon did, and it's similar to the last one covering Local 58, but the topic for this one just doesn't hit quite the same for me. There's quite a big tangent at the start of the video, which goes on for 5 or 6 minutes or so, being basically a meta commentary on horror as a whole, and not specifically about the lighthouse, which I think may even be the point of this film, just judging by the title of it. But the lighthouse for me wasn't even as interesting as Local 58 to begin with, so these two things combined for me just makes it a less interesting video, and so it'll have to go in the C tier. The Mystery of the Stairs in the Woods. This was the third spooky candlelit video by Wendigoon for Halloween, and I'll cut straight to the point. This is a C. It is better and more focused than the last video, as it just basically covers one story, but it lacks the super interesting topic that Local 58 had, and the production of the Local 58 and even the previous video. The whole video is him basically reading a Reddit story of these mysterious stairs that appear in the woods in various places and at various times. A little spooky, but not his best work. Sunday Studies, Samuel and Saul. Now, these videos of his are very interesting, not because they're by his character Wendigoon, but because they're by his person Isaiah. Obviously, he didn't make these videos for his brand or his character of Wendigoon, as his brand is kind of horror, lore, history, cool and interesting facts, not Bible study videos. The video's view count obviously reflects this lack of popularity with them, but I have to give him props for making videos that he is just genuinely interested in making, regardless of whether they do well or not on his channel. That being said, these are still going in the F tier, and that includes the part 2 that he made a few videos later. The Hidden Story of the Black Parade. So interestingly enough, Wendigoon actually considers this one his favorite video, and thought at the time of making this that it was his magnum opus or greatest work, and thought that it would go viral and show everyone the cool story of the Black Parade. And honestly, at the time, it did do quite well. It didn't blow up or anything, but I think similar to the Devil All the Time video, it gave Wendigoon more exposure to storytelling, essentially, and of taking a somewhat disconnected, convoluted story, telling the story, piecing it together, and exploring and coming up with certain theories of his own about how it ties together and what that represents for the story. The Black Parade is an album by My Chemical Romance, and each song in the album kind of tells part of this larger overarching story. But why it makes such a great Wendigoon video, I think, is that the storytelling in the album isn't super straightforward. The songs themselves are a little bit vague and can be taken in a few different ways, and they are laid out non-chronologically. So the order of these songs can also be taken in different ways. So maybe you start with song 6 for the first part of the story, and then you go to song 1, and then to song 3, and then to song 2. There's all these variations and theories for how it should be laid out and what it actually represents, which I think is where Wendigoon really shines. It basically tells the story of the main character, who is the patient, as he lives through his life and eventually dies and gets taken away by the Black Parade. Now, the theories go from him being a soldier to him being a terminally ill patient to many other theories. So this is a super cool one, and I'd probably say it's in the S tier if you are a massive My Chemical Romance fan. But since I'm only a basic fan, I'm gonna have to place it in the A tier. The worst Call of Duty ending Cold War analysis. I won't get much into this one. This is another Call of Duty gameplay / analysis. This time regarding the ending of Call of Duty Cold War. No massive insights, no mystery, no real production value. I love you, Wendigoon, but this one sits solidly in the F tier. The conspiracy theory iceberg videos. Now, these videos aren't actually on the tier lists, as there are quite a few of them and they're all quite similar, but Wendigoon did later compile them all into one giant video, which is on the tier list a little further down, so I will rank that video when it comes up. These were Wendigoon's first solid, bread and butter, really consistent videos. The scripts are very clean, the research is fantastic, the personality is there, the topics are incredible, the facial hair is facial hair, and again, the views and popularity of these videos really reflected this. Some of the previous videos that I've mentioned have between 80 and 100,000 views, whereas each episode of this iceberg basically has like 1 million views, so 10 times the viewership of some of his earlier videos. And it should be noted that this series took roughly a year to finish, and he would normally post 2, 3, or even more videos at a time, and then slot in one part of the conspiracy theory iceberg. So everything over the next year is kind of interwoven together, but a solid A tier series. The Last of Us Part 2 is telling the wrong story. Once again, Wendigoon makes a video game story video, and once again for me it falls a little flat, so D tier. The Kingsman church fight, but with the Wii Sports resort theme. This one is just... yeah, this is going in the F tier. I proved the JFK conspiracy with a whiteboard. So Wendigoon is a few episodes into the conspiracy theory iceberg at this point. So he was all probably hopped up on conspiracy theories and felt the need to cover somewhat in depth, somewhat shallowly, the JFK assassination conspiracy. And honestly, it is fantastic. It's a well-known conspiracy explained fairly well without going too much into the details. It's got Wendigoon's patented high-quality research with often mid-quality production. It's just him standing there in front of a whiteboard explaining why and how most of the stuff in the official story of the theory is just completely impossible and absurd in a lot of cases. And as I said, it is a great video, so this is going into the S tier. Rocco's Basilisk, a deeper dive. Warning, info hazard. So this was a deep dive on a topic that he covered in the conspiracy theory iceberg, which is Rocco's Basilisk. And it's kind of a wild theory. It's kind of like game theory mixed with something like Pascal's wager, translated through a modern kind of sci-fi-ish lens. And it basically says that hypothetically, sometime in the future, whenever this happens, that a super intelligent, super advanced AI will be developed. This is the Basilisk. And because it will be so advanced, it will know who exactly was responsible for creating it, for developing it, for supporting its creation, and conversely, who was responsible for maybe hindering its creation, or for not supporting the creation of the development for this AI. And it will take everyone that didn't support its development or progress for existing or being created, and it will, in many ways, because it's a hyper advanced AI, torture them for all eternity, which is a nutso idea, but the base point of it is that if you support this hypothetical basilisk, it's a win-win situation. If the basilisk doesn't get created, then you don't really lose much. But if it does get created, and for some reason you didn't support the idea of it before it was created, then you suffer an eternity of torture. So the theory says that it makes all the sense in the world to bow down and worship the basilisk before it's even created. Pretty wild theory, but a pretty solid video by Wendigoon. So this will be going into our B tier. And also, all hail the basilisk. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. Christmas with the Cranks is satanic communist propaganda. This is a pretty fun movie review, mixed with sarcasm, mixed with Wendigoon's dry sense of humor. It's basically a satire video, but it's a little hard to figure that out at some points in the review. This is a great, fun, light-hearted Christmas video, and as long as you don't take it too seriously, I would say it's solidly in the B tier. The Nashville Christmas Attack Theory. This was a light-hearted, joke-filled video regarding the semi-serious events of the Nashville Christmas attack in 2020. It's a fine video, but not super interesting or insightful or anything like that. I think the topic itself kind of lets it down a little bit, and the amount of humor in the video kind of lets it down a little bit as well, as personally I prefer there to be a little more kind of horror or seriousness or drama or theories to some of his videos. And it has 1/11th the views of, say, his JFK video, so clearly I'm not the only one who thinks that. So this will be going into the D tier. The Star Wars iceberg explained. This was his first iceberg that kind of goes away from his conspiracy theory iceberg series, and topically it's a little different to his regular stuff of horror and scary and spooky things, but theme-wise and feel-wise it's spot on. It's a fantastic video, especially if you love Star Wars, and the iceberg covers a bunch of little strange, interesting topics and theories in only 30 minutes. So this will go into the A tier. The SCP iceberg explained cognito hazard. So this is a really cool iceberg. The SCP stands for Secure, Control, Protect. And is this fictional, though to some people real, foundation or body that is above all government bodies in the world? It keeps itself super insanely secret and tasks itself with securing, controlling, and protecting all humans and all of Earth. Now, what exactly is it protecting us from? Well, honestly, pretty much everything. Giants, ghosts, cryptids, creatures, aliens, spirits, interdimensional space beings, and even more abstract things like concepts that we can't wrap our heads around, or that if we did learn about them would completely drive us insane or destroy us, as well as things that are seemingly impossible, like say a 5-sided square or dry water, to even stuff like infinitely large rooms. Think of them kind of like the Men in Black, but darker, more secretive, and more obscure. So that is the SCP as a foundation. But the lore around it and the individual creatures that are captured by SCP are all community written and powered. So you basically have this huge database online where almost anyone can write and invent an SCP entry, and that gets added to the lore. All the entries are named after SCP with normally just a number after them. So for instance, there's one of these entries which is a coffee machine that can dispense any liquid. It has apparently a little keypad that you can type into, and upon doing certain tests they were able to get water, coffee, sulfuric acid, wiper fluid, liquid iron, and liquid nitrogen. And there was this one entry where this guy was there with his friend Joe, and he asked the machine for a cup of Joe, which if you aren't aware is popular slang for coffee, but he asked it for a cup of Joe, and out of the machine came... Needless to say, Joe was rushed to hospital and he did survive, but this is the type of stuff we are dealing with the SCP. And this coffee machine is SCP-294. This is a super cool topic which I didn't know about before this video, and it is extremely well done by Wendigoon, so this will be going into the S tier. Every SCP-001 proposal explained is basically exactly what it says on the tin. Now, it should be noted that SCP-001 is still classified, and that's kind of like part of the lore of SCP, that the first thing ever captured, SCP-001, is basically unknown. So a bunch of people have come up with theories and proposals for what it actually is, and Wendigoon basically covers all of the theories in this video. A nice extension to the main iceberg, and this is going into the A tier. Childhood Trauma Explained is basically just Wendigoon going through some things that traumatized him as a kid. Nothing too serious, just stuff like scary films or cartoons or stories or concepts. It's not a super deep video, it's pretty chill, and it's only 30 minutes. So this will go into the B tier. The Game That Can Destroy the World, AI in a Box. So this video basically covers the idea of what can be done to stop a super advanced AI from taking over the world. It's a super age-old problem, I think, even before our recent advancements with AI, and it covers a few theories and ideas on how we can possibly stop it. One idea covers putting it into a box so that it's not able to actually affect anything outside of the box. And one problem with this is that if it can't affect anything outside of the box, then what's the point in creating it? As you would either need to let it out of the box in order to affect our world, or you would need to go in the box in order to affect it that way. And either way, when you cross these two worlds, you leave open the possibility of this AI affecting and potentially taking over the world. So he covers the idea of putting a screen on the outside of the box that can display text, so that the AI from inside of the box can essentially communicate outside of the box, but it can't do anything else, physical or otherwise. And a problem, of course, with this is that if it is a infinitely advanced AI and you have humans interacting with this screen, the AI should be able to convince whoever's looking at it to let it out of the box somehow. So a super fun video and a super interesting topic. So this will be going into the A tier. The Disturbing Movie Iceberg Explained graphic content. This is an hour and a half of Wendigoon exploring the most messed up, darkest, most horrible films in existence. Now, stuff like the Saw films, I think, are in the top either 1 or 2 tiers of the iceberg, and it goes down 7 or 8 tiers. So the stuff that regular people are used to thinking as gory or horrific or brutal are super, super tame compared to some of the stuff that he covers. He's not able to show a bunch of the video and even images of these films, and has to speak in code for a lot of them, as they are honestly very, very not okay for YouTube. And this was actually basically the first video that really exploded Wendigoon's channel, and is an amazing video if you really enjoy the super dark side of life. But for me personally, I prefer the more mysterious, more interesting topics rather than just these super gruesome, gory ones. So I know it is a incredibly popular video, but for me it is going into the A tier. We still haven't got anything in the Wendigoon tier yet. Lost Tapes, the show made to scare kids. So this is kind of an extension of an earlier video by Wendigoon, the childhood trauma one, and just explores this one television series, which is basically just realistic reenactments of some scary stories. It first aired in 2008 and is, I guess, light enough to draw kids into it, but still scary enough to scare and potentially traumatize them. It's a pretty fun video with live commentary and very minimal editing, and it's one of those ones, there's a few on the channel where I feel like I'm just watching Wendigoon watch the video, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it is Wendigoon, but I prefer the ones that are a little more scripted, a little more studied, a little more researched. And so for me, this is going into the not the B tier, the C tier. No Country for Old Men Explained, the Rule of Fire. So this is a video essay covering Wendigoon's favorite film of all time, No Country for Old Men. It's one of the videos he said that he wanted to make even before he made the channel. This and the Black Parade video. And this video explains fairly well not just the plot of the film, but the underlying thematic, narrative, and symbolic structures. And I just noticed for some reason now I can't find it in the tier list, which is a bit concerning, but the video does exist, and if it were in the tier list, it would be going in the A tier. The 100k Q&A. So this is after the Disturbing Movie Iceberg that really rocketed his subscribers. So he hit 100k subscribers pretty soon after that video. In this, he answers just a bunch of questions from various viewers, whether that's related to his preferences with the icebergs, or films, or videos, which ones he enjoys watching, which ones he enjoys making or researching. Some abstract questions, like if you stack 2 lasagnas on top of one another, do you still have 2 lasagnas, or is that now just one big lasagna? Which is a pretty easy question. You just have one lasagna, one really tall lasagna. There's also a bunch of questions about Wendigoon's or Isaiah's personal life, and this is a great video if you really vibe with Wendigoon or Isaiah as a person, as opposed to just some of the topics that he covers. So this will go into the B tier. The Religion and Cult Iceberg Explained. This one is over an hour long and covers mostly just cults, as a lot of the groups that we would typically call religions, like Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, etc., are in the top 2 tiers of this iceberg, and Wendigoon basically starts from the 3rd tier down, so just as good as his other iceberg videos, and covers some cool dark groups and cults. A tier. The most disturbing cult of all time, the Anthill Kids. So this is basically just a deep dive into one of the cults that he covers in the previous iceberg video. And the title for this is honestly quite spot on, as it is, to me, basically one of the darkest cults that has ever existed. Without going into too much detail about this, as this will get removed from YouTube if I do, the cult was made by and arranged around this guy, Roch Thériault, which that is pronounced horribly, but it is French, and French is sometimes insane. So let's just say Roch Thériault. I've probably completely angered my one French viewer right now. So he had these fanatical ideas about the end of the world and about apocalypse, and he was very convincing as he was very charismatic, as a lot of these cult leaders tend to be. He convinced a bunch of people to follow him into the Canadian wilderness, and he called this group the Anthill Kids, named for their ant-like hard work, which is a little creative, and he also went by the name Moses now. Such a humble guy. His group was to be free of desire, free of sin, and stand for complete unity and equality. So, naturally, soon after starting it, he took a dictatorial role and basically ruled the entire group with an iron fist. He stopped everyone from leaving the group, he didn't let them contact family members or friends, and he even stopped the individual members of the group speaking to each other without him present. And if he didn't think any one member was being devout enough, he would punish them. And these punishments would often consist of him beating them with belts, hammers, cutting off fingers, cutting off limbs, hanging them up and slowly ripping out all the hairs in their body, nailing them to trees and posts, and stuff like burning them and removing some of their teeth without even any anesthetic. So yeah, pretty fucked up guy. But his followers all stayed with him, whether that was out of fear, which it most likely was, and his female followers bore him 26 children. And of course the children were now followers, so he would continue to punish them in many of the same ways that he punished his actual followers. And he ended up killing 2 of them, one with a failed surgery that he performed, he wasn't even a doctor or anything, and one by leaving him outside during a blizzard. He was eventually arrested and taken to jail after one of his followers, who he maimed, eventually got the courage to flee and contact police. And when some of the other prisoners found out what he did, he was eventually killed in prison. So yeah, pretty messed up case, but Wendigoon covers it fairly well in the video, so this will be going into the A tier. The Hilarious Death of Archduke Ferdinand is another whiteboard, quickish rundown video of a political assassination, just like the JFK video. This one isn't as well known, isn't quite as entertaining for me, and the thumbnail game just isn't quite there yet. So for me, this will go into the C tier. The Unsolved True Crime Iceberg is another iceberg video that did incredibly well on Wendigoon's channel, and you can see why. It's an hour and a half of interesting true crimes, murders, disappearances, and unsolved cases, from everything like Tupac and Jack the Ripper to the very, very unknown. A great video all round and consistent with his other iceberg videos in my opinion, so we will be putting it into the A tier. The Story of the 38-Minute War is the amazing, strange story of the war between the UK and Zanzibar, which was the shortest war ever recorded in history at only 38 minutes. This is another stand-up whiteboard video of Wendigoon's, which I do enjoy the format of, and the whole war is explained fairly well. This video might have made it to the S tier if it was 38 minutes long, but sadly it's only 23 minutes long, so it is going into the A tier. Black Ops 1, but it's 2020. We are back to the strange gaming videos. So this is a video that Wendigoon said he made a lot earlier on, but just didn't upload. And it's just him playing Black Ops while discussing some of the storytelling within the game. Nothing new, nothing exciting. Thumbnail game is still super weak, although this was a earlier one. But either way, it is going into the F tier. Resident Evil 8 Wolfsbane 2 hours speedrun is, again, what it says on the tin. A speedrun of a video game. He plays the game while commentating mostly in relation to the plot points of the game and how he sees the overall structure and quality of the characters and of the plot. Not too bad of a content, but it is basically a 2 hours unprepared video of Wendigoon riffing. And as I said, I personally much prefer his more structured content. So, as with a lot of the other video game episodes, this will be going in the F tier. The Bible Theory Iceberg Explained. So clearly his iceberg videos are more well liked than his gaming videos. 200k on his speedrun video and almost 6 million on this one. And this is an interesting video because it's not really spooky or scary like a lot of his videos on his channel up to this point are. But it does have these strong religious and biblical ties that we have seen in stuff like his Bible reading series. And I'll be honest, the iceberg is pretty interesting. Even if you're not religious or Christian, you can still perhaps see it as just lore of some kind. And it basically covers everything from the very well known, like the Bible, Jesus, God, the Trinity, etc., down to, say, the different types of angel in the Bible, as well as obscure lines in the Bible that maybe can be taken a few different ways. So the theories about some of those, as well as some more unknown things about the Bible. For me, it's a nice detour from some of his scarier stuff, so this will have to go solidly in the A tier. A director sent us the most disturbing movie ever made, featuring Mr. GG and Plagued Moth. So this is basically just Wendigoon watching the most disturbing movie ever made, which isn't the most disturbing movie ever made, but rather a compilation of outrageous meme videos. It's fun if you want a bit of a laugh, but it's nowhere near Wendigoon's typical quality. And I feel like I did get clickbaited a little bit by the title. So, F tier. The Serial Killer Iceberg Explained. The Serial Killer Iceberg Explained covers the first 3 tiers of the Serial Killer Iceberg. It's a pretty solid video with some interesting backstory and front story of some of the serial killers in it. And at this point, he also moved from numbering his iceberg series to just calling them different names, as you'll see a few videos later. But for now, this is going into the A tier on the list. The scariest series on YouTube, Gemini Home Entertainment. So this covers another analog horror series, similar to one that he covered earlier on his channel, Local 58, but completely different. Gemini Home Entertainment is a horror video series that is posted up on YouTube and explores horror in these subtle, creative ways, as opposed to just the modern jump scares or over-the-top stuff like you get in a lot of other horror. Gemini Home Entertainment is honestly a super interesting and creative series, as was the Local 58 video. So this video I think rightly belongs alongside Local 58 in the S tier. Sunday Studies, The Death of David. Another Bible studies video. Great if you love Wendigoon and Bibles. Not so great if you don't. So F tier. And I'm also going to take the Bible studies video that he did a few videos later and throw it into the F tier as well. The Weirdest Serial Killers Iceberg. So this covers tier 4 of the Serial Killer Iceberg, with fewer serial killers but more in-depth analysis for each one. So great stuff, and this is going into the A tier. And it looks like I've cut off the Wendigoon tier, but it's still up there. It's just some of these other tiers are getting a little chunkier, so they've pushed everything down. The Cannibal Killing of Michael Rockefeller. And yes, that is the Rockefeller family. Michael Rockefeller was one of the grandsons of one of the big Rockefellers, and he was 23 years old in 1961. Obviously coming from a family of hyper successful people, Michael had some kind of craving for adventure or novelty or success, and he found that in essentially exploring. He actually has a quote that says, "It's the desire to do something adventurous at a time when frontiers in the real sense of the word are disappearing," which is a pretty good quote pretty profound. So he went on various expeditions, and the most important one was one where he was studying the Asmat tribe. Now, the Asmat were a tribe in Papua New Guinea who were famous for their intricate wooden statues, sculptures, and carvings, and for cannibalism. On his expedition to observe these people, Michael's canoe got flipped over, and he was instructed by the local guides to stay put while they went in search of help. He didn't listen. He tried to swim to the shore of this island, and he said to his buddy who he was with that, yeah, I can make this 12-mile swim. That was also through shark and crocodile infested waters in the middle of a storm at night. So yeah, I don't know if he had a death wish or if he was just incredibly brave or a combination of the two, but he left his friend, swam for the shore, and was never seen again. It is thought that even if he did make it to the shore, he would have been killed and cannibalized by the tribe, as after Michael's disappearance, in future interactions with the tribe, apparently certain tribes members could be heard saying stuff like, don't tell them we killed the guy, and yeah, we ate him, don't tell anyone sort of thing. No body was ever found, so the jury is still completely out on this one. But there's one interesting theory that says that Michael did make it to the shore, and he was accepted fully by the tribe. The theory says that Michael just really wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of normal life, and just to live with the tribe, but his family members and friends in the Western world would never accept it. So he basically faked his own death. He's chilling in a hut somewhere with the tribe, and whenever searches are done or expeditions or interviews are done with the tribe, Michael has told them to constantly drop hints that he was cannibalized or killed in order that people stop looking for him, essentially. Well, it's a thought, and it's a pretty wild theory, but Wendigoon does a pretty good job, as always, of covering this case, so it'll be going into the A tier. The Psychopath Test Hair Psychopathy Checklist. So this is the checklist often used by psychologists and clinicians in order to detect whether someone is a psychopath or not. It's a pretty interesting video, and Wendigoon does basically just walk us through and take the test himself, in which he gets a 15 out of 40 for psychopathy, which is a little concerning. An interesting topic all round, so this will go in the B tier. The Oddest Serial Killer Iceberg Explained, and you can see what I mean about the numbering of the episodes now. This is all just one big serial killer iceberg, but they're just named different things as opposed to being numbered. Some solid stuff, darker cases, more messed up serial killers, fun for all the family. A tier. Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Now, this one is super weird and creepy. This video covers a fictional, thank God, national park that contains a living, breathing flesh pit inside or under the ground. It's got this friendly, for fun kind of vibe to it, with like tour guides and pamphlets and vacation photos of the type you'd see in maybe the Grand Canyon or something. But a lot of the warnings describe how dangerous the flesh pit can be, saying that there's creatures within the flesh pit that can kill you, and like if you're walking along and one of them notices you, what you have to do exactly, as they take no responsibility for your death. So yeah, the creatures in it can kill you, the plants can kill you, the pit itself can kill you, either by consuming or dissolving you, as there are these giant acid pits that I guess represent like stomach acid. It also has some lovely areas like the bronchial forests, which represent the lungs. It has thermal springs, visitor centers, tunnels, paths, a fondue village, all made of flesh, and all, I'm guessing, belonging to this giant creature that's underground and still alive, and for some reason doesn't mind people crawling into it. So a really creepy, but you've got to give it to them, creative horror lore story website sort of thing. And it's just an hour 15 of Wendigoon exploring and explaining it all. So this will have to go in the S tier. The Spy Who Hilariously Won World War II covers the insane double agent life of Juan Puyol Garcia. He was a Spanish man who created this pro-Nazi persona in World War II, and because of this got a lot of positive attention from the Germans. He then essentially used this trust from the Germans to spy on Britain, except he wasn't actually spying on them, and he wasn't actually pro-Nazi. He was getting funding from Germany to spy on Britain, and he would send back all of this false or near false information about Britain to the Germans. And this was all done by his network of 27 spies, none of which existed. He made up the information, he made up the spies, their names, their histories, backgrounds, everything, and somehow the Germans never found out. He ended up delaying several attacks of the Germans to give the British more time. He ended up diverting a bunch of the military force by the Germans, saving countless ally lives, and he was one of the only people in the war to win both the German Iron Cross Award and the Member of the Order Award by Britain, as even after the war ended, Germany still wasn't aware that Juan was a double agent. It's a pretty cool story that I really enjoyed and honestly doesn't get spoken about much, but this video definitely deserves an S for spy. Every political ideology explained. Oh boy, here we go. This is an amazing video. It's a 2-hour whiteboard video, which sounds entertaining, I know, but it genuinely is. It's one of the first videos I saw by Wendigoon, and for me, it's super fun, super entertaining to watch, and teaches you a lot about political ideologies that maybe you don't know of, or gives you some more in-depth information about ones that you do know of. And I know I'm not really selling it very well, but it is a very fun and informative video to watch. He covers common stuff like communism, capitalism, democracy, to crazy ones like kleptocracy, situationism, and social Darwinism. Great video, great topic, great thumbnail, and he's getting better at those. So if you couldn't tell from my excitement, this will be our first Wendigoon tier video. And sadly, I will have to hide it away again as I cannot see the rest of the videos, but it is up there. The Depraved Serial Killer Iceberg. The Depraved Serial Killer Iceberg Explained is the 6th tier of this iceberg. Not much to say here, it gets a little deeper into the iceberg, stabby stabby, killy killy, serial killer's bad, and I think this is exactly why I didn't cover every single video of the conspiracy theory iceberg. But, the same as ever, A tier. The Walking Dead Iceberg Explained is brilliant. I absolutely love The Walking Dead, but I am aware that a lot of people have mixed feelings about it. But this iceberg covers a bunch of trivia and facts about the series, as well as alternate theories, behind the scenes, or alternate outcomes or histories. It covers some super interesting stuff, and if you like The Walking Dead, then this video is definitely an S tier video. But if you don't like The Walking Dead, then this is maybe a B tier video or even an F tier video if you really hate The Walking Dead. But for me, solid S tier. The Dementia Simulation. Everywhere at the End of Time Reaction. Now, the original music piece that this video is covering is a fantastic but terrifying piece of art. It is 6.5 hours long, is in 6 stages, and it is mostly instrumental music that's supposed to represent the journey or decay of the mind when someone is suffering from dementia. So it takes you all the way from being completely fine to occasionally forgetting, all the way through to stuff like forgetting where you are or who your own family members are. I myself have listened to the entire 6-hour piece, and it is honestly quite a journey. Don't be surprised if you are terrified out of your mind or are brought to tears while listening to it. This 50-minute video is just Wendigoon listening basically to the entire 6 hours and commenting periodically on what he thought about a certain point, or what it feels like in the moment, or the emotions he's going through. It's kind of like a live experiment sort of thing. I would recommend listening to the entire 6-hour piece, but if you don't want to, or you really like Wendigoon, or a combination of the both, then this I think is a fantastic substitute. And so this will be our second Wendigoon tier video. The 9 types of biblical angels explained. This is a video that Wendigoon actually promised to do when he made the Bible iceberg, so he kept to his word. There are basically 9 types of angels in the Bible, and he covers them all fairly well, so it's a pretty interesting video if you like Bible stuff, or you like lore, or you just like Wendigoon's videos in general. Nothing super mind-blowing or deep, but a great video nonetheless, so it will be going into the B tier. The weird and dirty social experiment, the Akali raft. So this raft was dubbed the sex raft and was a social experiment of kinds in the 1970s. It was done by a man named Santiago Genovese, and the idea was to get 10 attractive people, 5 men, 5 women, put them on a raft or boat in the middle of the ocean and kind of stir things up a little bit. He said his theory was that when people are pushed to the edge in a way, they will either resort to violence or sex. I won't spoil much much, but it didn't really go as planned, even with Santiago trying to stir things up quite a bit. But it is a super cool experiment nonetheless, and this will go into the A tier. Dante's Inferno and the 9 levels of hell explained. This was a super cool video that explains something we all know of, but don't really know about. And videos that cover specifically that kind of topic, I am a huge fan of, and it's partly why I started making these YouTube videos, and it's also a style of topic that I would love to get into in some other videos, covering stuff that everyone knows of, but doesn't really know too much about, which makes for a super interesting exploration. Like, pretty much everyone's heard of Dante's Inferno, including myself, but before watching this video, I couldn't have told you where it originally came from, if it was a story, who wrote the story, who exactly Dante was, what exactly he did in the Inferno. So I had a ton of fun and enjoyment watching this video and exploring the story of Dante's Inferno with Wendigoon. So top tier video that belongs in the Wendigoon tier. The most disturbing analog horror story, the Mandela Catalog. So this is a video which I think on Wendigoon's channel is most likely demonetized, as I got a graphic content warning when I clicked on the video, but it is a video covering another analog horror, that being the Mandela Catalog. And honestly, the more and more I watch of these analog horrors, the more interested and fascinated I become with them. So I may have to cover 1 or 2 of them on my channel, as long as I find the right one. This is great psychological horror, no eerie jump scares or typical horror stuff, but lots of cryptic, eerie, slow, subtle horrors. And even though this is listed as the most disturbing analog horror, I still think I prefer his earlier analog horror stories, covering stuff like Local 58 or the Gemini Home Entertainment, which I think is an unpopular opinion. I know this is quite a popular analog series, but it is very close to being S tier, but I think I'll have to put it in the A tier. The true stories of the Warren hauntings, The Conjuring, Annabelle, Amityville, and other encounters. So this is an interesting exploration video, not necessarily of any horror or haunting in particular, but kind of the backstories of them. So this basically covers the lives of the paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were these real people in the 60s and 70s who investigated various paranormal claims. The stories they have since told of these various encounters and investigations have over the years been taken and made either directly or just based off the Warren encounters. These include stuff like, as the title suggests, the story of The Conjuring, of Annabelle, the Amityville horrors, and many more. A cool behind the scenes kind of video, as I don't think you would really know this story unless you saw some backstory like this, and a solid A for a lot of scare. The most terrifying ocean mysteries. So this was one of Wendigoon's Halloween videos, where he covers the most terrifying thing that he can think of, the ocean, which I don't fully disagree with him there. This covers stuff like the Celeste ghost ship, the Flannan Isles lighthouse incident, which I've actually covered on this channel, and just general paragraphs about the fearsomeness of the ocean. He goes on a really great tirade or rant at the end of the video, just explaining how dark and mysterious and huge the ocean is. And I think this one is a super fun, entertaining video, and fantastic thumbnail. I don't know who is making these for him, but this one just looks fantastic. Solid S tier. A hopeful hell. I have no mouth and I must scream. Now this one is a super cool story about this sci-fi apocalyptic world, or post-apocalyptic. Basically, a supercomputer has taken over the entire Earth, and it has killed every last human except for 5. And these 5 are basically its playthings. It does experiments on them, it teases them, it just messes with them, and it's able to basically, with its advanced knowledge, keep them alive indefinitely. And if they ever get injured or have broken bones or anything like that, it just heals them right up back to full health, essentially. So yeah, it basically keeps them in these kind of metal corridors. It feels like a spaceship, but it's actually Earth. It keeps them in here for just hundreds of years, torturing them both physically and psychologically and mentally. And it tortures them in like these really petty human-like ways. Like, for instance, the people are always starving pretty much, and they can't die of hunger, so it's like a perpetual feeling. So this AI will just randomly place these cans of food in a corridor or something, so when the people come around, they're like, oh my god, there's food here, let's get the food. But then of course the tins are made out of this indestructible metal that can basically never be opened. So the AI was just fucking with them the whole time, pretty much. I won't spoil too much about it because it is kind of a fun story to read, but it was written in 1966, and the last few words of the story are the same as the title. So that should give you some idea about how the whole thing ends. You can read the original or the comic book adaptation of it, or the audiobook or Wendigoon's coverage of it, but it is a great story to read. And I almost forgot about a rating for this, so A tier. And we have more Bible studies. This one is going into the S tier for Sunday studies. I'm kidding. Down you go into the F tier, where you belong. There's a good Bible studies. The monstrous serial killer iceberg explained. This covers the 7th tier of the serial killer iceberg, and while we're at it, the next video in the series just covers the 8th tier. Both great videos. Who doesn't love a good serial killer story? And both will go into the A tier for he's gonna kill me. The monsters beneath us, the monument mythos. This is an immense video covering an immense story. It is over 3 hours long and covers the monument mythos, which is basically an alternate reality or alternate history in the form of an analog horror series that was made in 2016. In this reality, James Dean becomes the president of the United States, Martin Luther King is still alive, computers are banned, and national monuments such as the Statue of Liberty, the Lincoln Memorial, the Suez Canal, and Mount Rushmore all contain these dark secrets and horrifying monsters both within them and beneath them. Really cool story, series, lore, whatever you want to call it. And I absolutely love stuff like alternate histories or alternate realities. And this is all blended in and mixed with the format of analog horrors. So this is just really a mwah of a topic, and so this video obviously belongs in the Wendigoon tier. The man who stepped off the earth, Chris McCandless. Now, can I just say before anything else, I love the decision to keep the thumbnail as one of Chris McCandless's original photos. This is one that he took of himself in the wilderness, and Wendigoon could have so easily over-edited this, or added text, or made a concept thumbnail of some kind, which totally would have been appropriate for YouTube, but I love that he kept one of the original photos as the thumbnail, as I think the photo goes a really long way into representing Chris McCandless and just the sort of person that he was. So Chris McCandless, or Supertramp as he liked to call himself, is a man who came from a fairly wealthy family. So he was well off, he was a smart kid, but he just despised society, capitalism, and greed. But he didn't do it in a violent or toxic way. He just felt like people couldn't really experience the joys of life when they were caught up in the system of society, and he never really wanted to destroy society or hurt anyone in any way. It was actually quite the opposite. He loved pretty much everyone. He cared for and inspired everyone he met on his travels, and it started when he, without his parents' knowledge or of course permission, decided to basically run away, donate all of his college funds to charity, abandon his car and just go hitchhiking, trekking, and adventuring like one of the classic hobos. He worked for various people, would save up money for little journeys or trips or items that he needed, like a canoe, and sometimes he would just take the money that he had saved up and just give it away to someone and then just start afresh in the next village or town. He really was a genuine, unique individual, and eventually went to live off in a remote area in Alaska, which is where the thumbnail's photo is from and what the title is referencing. I would highly encourage you to watch Into the Wild, which is a film based on his life and adventures, and it also has a great soundtrack by Eddie Vedder, who was one of the guitarists in Pearl Jam. Into the Wild is one of my favorite films of all time. The story of Chris McCandless is one of my favorite stories of all time, and the soundtrack is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that this is going into the Wendigoon tier. The conspiracy theory tier list. So just one video before this, Wendigoon had finished the entire conspiracy theory iceberg. So in this video, he basically takes his top 70 favorite conspiracy theories and ranks them in a tier list, much like I'm doing in this video, based on basically his subjective favorites. A pretty fun recap of some of his favorite theories from the iceberg, but I don't think it adds too much unique value, so this will be going in the B tier. If I'm disturbed, I donate. YouTube's scariest videos with Mr. GG. So this was a charity live stream of Wendigoon and Mr. GG, who, if you haven't heard of him, did the incredible To Catch a Predator series. He didn't make the actual series, but he made a series based on that series. They watch scary videos, and if they get scared, they donate to charity. A little fun, pretty simple, but not super deep. So, predictably, this is going in the F tier. The conspiracy behind MLK's assassination, and that might have just got me demonetized. So this was one of the 4 major assassinations that took place in the 1960s. JFK's was in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, then MLK in 1968, followed by Robert F. Kennedy later on that year. And this was around the time where the FBI and the CIA were being super murdery, so it's not a wonder that a lot of theories and evidence surrounding these assassinations are linked to the FBI and CIA. Wendigoon breaks down the story and backstory of MLK and of his eventual assassination while trying real hard not to say that the FBI did it, which is absolutely hilarious and really fun to watch. A great video all round, going into the S tier. The mass hysteria iceberg covers events of, well, mass hysteria. A lot of people going crazy all at once. Old Testament, real wrath of God type stuff. Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies, rivers and seas boiling, 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes, the dead rising from the graves, human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. He cuts off the first top tier and gets right down into the good stuff, which is a good decision, but for me, this iceberg doesn't really hit some of the interesting topics. So this will sit comfortably in the B tier for me. The Tragic Voyage of Terror, the Lost Franklin Expedition. So this covers the story of the Franklin Expedition of the Arctic. A super interesting story, and I do love old stories and cases like this, whether they're based in the 60s or 70s or World War II or even long before that. It's like it kind of mixes history with geography with a bit of drama, and you're learning about new people in new circumstances with new events in completely new times that you're not used to, and it's just all around a great video. So it belongs, I think, into the S tier. Dante's Purgatorio and the 9 levels of purgatory. This is a kind of interesting one. A lot of people are aware of Dante's Inferno, and a lot of people know about purgatory, but I don't think a lot of people are aware of Dante's exploration and description of purgatory. It's a super interesting topic with a very fascinating story if you're into this sort of thing, and I'm kind of torn on where to place it on the tier list. On one hand, it's less popular than the Hell topic, so it should go lower than the Inferno video, but on the other hand, because it's less popular, it's perhaps able to teach people more and introduce them to a topic that they didn't know existed. So that is my dilemma, but I think I will have to go with my gut and say it goes in the S tier. The controversial disease with illegal symptoms. So this covers a disease or condition called Munchausen by proxy. Now, Munchausen syndrome is where you basically make up or exaggerate a disease in order to get some sort of attention. Now, Munchausen is when you exaggerate something about yourself, and the by proxy is where you exaggerate it about someone else, often a family member or child. Now, this is often done for a more sinister reason than the regular Munchausen. It's not just to get attention, but it's to often get control over the child by debilitating them to such an extent that they absolutely require your attention and support. It's like breaking someone's legs so that they need you to push them around. So this is a controversial disease because now a lot of countries don't even accept that it exists, as it was often used as basically an excuse in courts of law, where say a mother had poisoned her kid so that she was constantly ill and needed constant support from the mother, and the courts eventually found this out. The defense would say that the mother had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which if proven would somewhat lessen the responsibility of the mother, because they could say she has a disease, she has a syndrome, it's not really her fault sort of thing. And so a few cases ran into this issue over the years. It's a pretty wild case, and it is going in the B tier. B for boy, that was a wild case. The deadliest shipwreck and shark attack in naval history. This covers the USS Indianapolis, a large ship that sank in the Philippine Sea in 1945 and left 900 people adrift for 5 days. Following the sinking of the ship, because they were in shark-infested waters, this resulted in the most amount of people being killed by sharks in a single event in history, which was 150 people. A wild story, especially if you love naval stories. And this is going into the S tier, S for shark. The bizarre mystery of the Kamadaban deaths. This one has massive Dyatlov Pass vibes, and it's very similar in a lot of ways. 7 hikers were up in the Siberian mountains in 1993, and 6 of them mysteriously dropped dead of seemingly unknown causes. A few of them had fits, seizures, foaming at the mouth, and bleeding from their orifices, or orifici. I don't know what the plural for that is. Just horrible stuff. But it's never really been explained just how or why these deaths happen. And the only surviving member of the hike basically just refuses to talk about the incident anymore. So what exactly caused these deaths of the hikers? My best guess, as a few others have pointed out, is that the group likely ran into some experimental nerve gas that was being manipulated and created by the Russian government up in the Siberian mountains. All the symptoms are there for stuff like a nerve gas, the seizures, the foaming at the mouth, the bleeding, and the Russians were known for experimenting on various nerve gases around this time period in the 90s. But that is my best guess from all the different theories that I've seen about this, although even that best guess still has not very much evidence for. The whole thing is quite secretive, so it's a bit of a wild story. A very tragic case, and this is going into the A tier. The complete Five Nights at Freddy's story explained. So this is almost an hour and a half of Wendigoon just exploring and explaining the entire Five Nights at Freddy's lore. It's a pretty decent horror story overall, and it's obviously insanely popular, especially in the last few years. But for me, the Five Nights at Freddy's story is just a little bit on the nose for me in terms of horror. As you know from some of the earlier entries in this tier list, I tend to go for the more psychological horrors, the more subtle and creepy horrors, which this one is quite subtle and creepy, but it still has the kind of scary face sort of horror style. But that being said, if you are a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, then this is a fantastic video to go over the entire story from beginning to end, and I think you'll find it very entertaining. But for me, it is going into the A tier. The Five Nights at Freddy's VHS tapes, an analog horror adaptation. So this is still within the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, but it's exploring the VHS tapes as opposed to the video games that were in the first video. And for me, the stuff covered in this video is a lot more enjoyable horror-wise. It's a lot more subtle, it's a lot more kind of psychological and creepy, as opposed to the video games that were covered in the first video, which are a little more kind of traditional horror style. I personally found this one a little more interesting than the original video, so this follow-up will be going into the S tier. The Hypnagogic Archive, an anthology ARG. This one is immense. So the Hypnagogic Archive is this huge alternate reality game centered on and around this particular website. This doesn't really look like a game, but basically you go onto the website, which is set up to look like and be and feel kind of like an archive of old internet text files, images, audio files, videos. But the idea is to kind of click through all of these files and find certain clues in it, and then those clues lead you to other files, which lead you to links, which lead you to other clues, and the whole thing tells this kind of overarching story. And as you go, things just get creepier and darker and weirder, and it honestly seems like a ton of fun to explore. I had a little click around and there is some creepy stuff in there, but it's just not my absolute favorite. So this will go comfortably in the A tier. The lost footage of the Hypnagogic Archive. So this video basically just extends the last video and shows just a bunch of content and footage that was lost from the original archive. A decent video as an extension, but I would say worse as a standalone than the original one, so this will have to go into the B tier. The downfall of Henry Ford's secret country in Brazil. Now, before I get into this one, I have to say that the thumbnails at this point have really improved. Like, this one is so simple, yet so beautiful and aesthetic at the same time. It's not boring, it's not overly complex, and I don't know if Wendigoon had someone making thumbnails for him at this point, or if he just suddenly got incredibly artistic, but well done on these. So this video covers the insane case of a country named Fordlandia that was founded by Henry Ford inside Brazil. It was basically like a factory town where he had a bunch of factories. He had houses and shops and streets all next to these factories, and stuff like factory bells kind of out on the street that would actually ring when like it was time to wake up, and when it was time to go home, and when it was time to go to the factory, which is not unheard of when large manufacturing or nuclear plants or something like that are made in a certain area. There's normally a bunch of flats or houses or even small towns built next to them in order that the workers can live there and not have to travel too far. So it's not unheard of to do stuff like this, but Ford just took it one step further, I guess. It's a cool story, but not super memorable, I don't think. So this will be going into the A tier. The American broadcaster convicted of treason, Tokyo Rose. This is basically the story of, in World War II, there was a Japanese-American broadcaster who was born to Japanese parents, but she was born in America. So she was, for all intents and purposes, American. And before Pearl Harbor happened, she actually traveled back to Japan and was trapped in Japan when Japan entered the war. So she wasn't allowed to leave Japan, she wasn't allowed to go back to America, so she basically started working for the Japanese, doing some sort of military broadcasting for them. This was basically like psychological warfare, where a bunch of Japanese broadcasters would send out messages in English to people like American troops in order to try and fuck with their battle arrangements or to demotivate them, saying they're going to lose the war and their wives are going to cheat on them while they're at war. It was pretty mad stuff, but she was caught up doing that. And then after the war, she was convicted of treason because she was American and she was in Japan at the time, basically fighting against the American military. It was a pretty interesting case, but in my opinion, not super memorable or necessarily unique. So this will have to go into the B tier. Salad Fingers Explained, an analysis of broken imagination. So anyone who has watched Salad Fingers as a kid, which honestly should be everyone, as it is a fantastic, really creepy, really strange bit of classic internet content. Anyone who has watched the original Salad Fingers series will absolutely love this video. Salad Fingers is kind of this low budget, creepy, grim, eerie, but slightly funny in a really dark way series that has some story and lore which I didn't even know about before watching this. I thought they were all just disconnected, kind of creepy videos that were made. But there is some sort of underlying lore, which is a little vague and hard to determine, probably why I didn't know about it. But the vagueness of the lore, I think, leaves a lot open to people's imaginations and interpretations of what's actually going on in the series. And I personally really enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed the explanations of the different episodes in Salad Fingers. And I enjoyed the theories that Wendigoon was putting forward about what actually he thinks is going on in the series and with the characters. And he also puts forward a few alternate theories that he doesn't necessarily believe in, but that he knows are quite popular, and he tries to debunk them in a way. Super fun video, especially for me and especially for anyone if you like Salad Fingers. So it shouldn't be a surprise that I will be placing this up into the Wendigoon tier. The Conspiracy Theory Iceberg. This is the grand finale of the, well, not the grand finale, the last episode in the series was the grand finale, but this is the compilation of the entire iceberg. It's 9.5 hours long, 10 tiers, and 11 million views. So this is a serious chunk of a video. You could literally turn it on, go have 8 hours of solid sleep, and then come back and you would still have an hour and a half left of the video still playing. You would probably have some very strange dreams though, just wild conspiracies being fed into your unconscious as you slept. So perhaps not the best idea, but hey, it might actually make your dreams better in a way. So a very solid video. It cuts out all the intros, all the outros, all the ads, and all the fluff of all of his episodic videos, and is just 9.5 hours of solid conspiracy theories. So I think I would be crazy not to place this in the Wendigoon tier. Dante's Paradiso and the 9 Levels of Heaven Explained. Now, I think this video suffers from the same thing that the Purgatory video suffered from, in that it's just not quite as well known as the Dante's Inferno story, and honestly, it's probably not quite as interesting either. There was a story I remember reading of how painters of olden times probably enjoyed painting stuff like hell and torture more than they enjoyed painting the divine and heaven, which seems a bit like sick and twisted, but it's mostly true when you think about it, even with us here on YouTube. I mean, when it comes to news, people typically prefer and watch bad news more than they enjoy good news. And with videos, I mean, all of these videos that Wendigoon covers, that we watch, that we binge constantly, are stuff like missing people, serial killers, murders, explosions, plagues. Like, we just can't get enough of that stuff. You know, stuff like the top 10 most perfect flights that didn't crash, or the smoothest flights in existence. Those don't really exist, and if they do exist, I don't think they'd get too many views. What does get views? Top 10 explosions, top 10 crazy flight crashes, death, destruction, accidents, violence. It seems to be what we all crave, and I don't know if I should read any more into it than that. But I think that is genuinely why Dante's Inferno is more well known than his other books, Exploring Purgatory or Heaven, because I think just people don't enjoy it as much. It's a fine video if you want to complete the trilogy if you've watched the two others, but I'm gonna place it into the B tier. The story and footage of LA's most infamous heists gone wrong. This is honestly one of my favorite videos on the channel. This heist and eventual shootout was absolutely flipping insane. And basically after this heist, it changed how banks deal with crimes and heists and robberies, even still to this day. It's a super interesting video, a super fun video if you like drama and that sort of thing. The thumbnail, I think, is quite simple yet fantastic. And so this is going up into the Wendigoon tier. The cult, standoff, and conspiracy of Waco. So the Waco cult, or the Branch Davidians, were wild. And being a cult and being a wild cult, they shared a lot of similarities to some other crazy cults like, say, the Anthill Kids. They were strangely both an offshoot of Seventh-day Adventists. They were both led by a charismatic guy with long hair, and that guy in both instances believed that the end of the world was imminent and that doomsday was coming and that they all needed to be saved. And I think I'm seeing a pattern as a way to control people. But this video does a great job of exploring the topic of the cult, back from before they were a cult, how they got started, some conspiracy theories around them, and the eventual shootout that ended in a massive tragedy. This is honestly a top tier video that naturally belongs in the top tier. So this is going all the way up into the Wendigoon tier. And things are starting to get a little crowded up here now. The Mandela Catalogue's Conquest of Fear explores the second part of the Mandela Catalogue. And in some ways, I felt like this second part is even more entertaining and interesting than the first part of the series. And that being said, you should probably watch the first part anyway, just to get a more complete picture of the series and the story, and so you're not leaving any open loops. In case you need a reminder, the Mandela Catalogue story covers this alternate reality, where these creatures take the place of various humans. So people that you meet might be the person that you know, and they might be this weird alien doppelganger creature thingy. So that single premise to begin with is already super creepy. So in my opinion, this is a little step up from the first video, and so I think it deserves one step up from the first video, which will be in the S tier. The Boys on the Tracks and a 35-year cover-up. So this video and story is absolutely wild. The story covers basically these two boys who were playing on the tracks and they ended up getting into an accident. They were run over by a train and they both died. Except that's not really what happened. Further investigations found that the boys were actually placed on the tracks and were intentionally killed in order to cover up evidence. Now, who placed them here and who was behind this horrific crime and conspiracy? Well, that's basically what the video is covering. It covers a bunch of evidence. It covers some police ties, some FBI ties, even stuff like the president is connected to this. So yeah, super enjoyable video, super wild story, and I think Wendigoon honestly does an excellent job of covering the story, as well as exploring various conspiracy theories and just theories about it. So yeah, predictably, this is going up into the Wendigoon tier. The unexplainable disappearances of Missing 411. So Missing 411 cases, which is a term invented by David Paulides, are cases of missing people, or other persons, where the information and logistics, if you will, about the missing person's case are basically a mystery or unknown. So you might have heard of the term before, 411, like, yo, what's the 411, you know? And that basically means what's up, what's the information, and that comes from the 411 telephone number being the directory assistance for information in America and Canada. It's like 911, but it's the number you dial for directory assistance instead of the authorities. So the idea is missing 411 is like a missing persons case that's missing directory assistance, or that's missing information about it. That's basically the idea behind the name. So a bunch of these cases might involve, say, kids in national parks that might disappear for a few hours or a few days and then even turn back up with no knowledge or memory of what happened, and stuff like traveling impossible distances in short periods of time. So maybe they disappear for like 5 hours and then turn up 5 hours later, like 15 hours worth of travel away. So to qualify as a missing 411 case, they need to hit these kind of specific point markers that make them especially strange and interesting disappearances. So that's basically what the list of missing 411 cases are, and Wendigoon basically just covers a few of them in this video, along with Law Lodge, who, if you haven't seen him, is a pretty interesting YouTuber who covers disappearances like this, as well as lore, as the name suggests, and stuff like cryptids and creatures and that sort of thing. Kind of a fun video, but it is a collab video, which don't always turn out too well, but I think this video did just fine, and so I will place it into the A tier. The most disturbing haunted house of all time, McCamey Manor. This is basically what it says on the tin, and I would love to show you videos of these haunted house experiences, but I would 100% get demonetized, not even demonetized. This video would likely get taken down. Look this stuff up in your own time if you want to, but I will not be responsible for it. So this covers a haunted house run by Russell McCamey in Tennessee. But this haunted house is less a haunted house and more of like a torture house experience sort of thing. The guy who owns it and runs it says that it is like this spooky, haunted, survival, scary experience slash boot camp. But really, you just sign this waiver, which has some crazy lines and agreements in it, and then you just spend the next few hours basically being tortured, both physically and psychologically. This can and does include cuts, bruises, broken bones, teeth being removed, some or all of your hair being shaved, cut, or ripped out, being drugged, being waterboarded, being exposed to raw sewage, being forced to eat stuff like dirt and bugs, and being exposed to poisonous bugs, snakes, all sorts of things. Why would people agree and sign and go and do this sort of thing? That is a very good fucking question. Are some of these people insane? Yes. Are they all most likely insane in some way? Also yes. But some of them are maybe naively after the money prize of the experience. And that is $20,000 to whoever can last the entire 8 hours. Now 8 hours is a really, really long time when you're being tortured. Even 8 seconds can feel like an eternity. But what often will happen is the person will be messed around with for maybe an hour or two. Then it'll get really extreme to kind of try and force them to surrender. As if they leave before the 8 hours, they don't get any of the money. And then they will ramp up the torture so much that no one has yet made it through. And in fact, some of the people that refuse to give up, Russell always finds some way around it by saying they have hypothermia, so he personally will not allow this to continue. So of course, it's very convenient for him to just cut it early and then the person doesn't get their 20k. So honestly, this is just a big scam. The prize money will never realistically be won, and Russell himself doesn't seem like a level-headed, balanced individual. He genuinely just seems like a psychopath who enjoys hurting people and has found a legal way in which to do it. So a really messed up case, and this will go into the B tier for broken bones. The time Germans and Americans fought together in World War II, the Battle of Castle Itter. So this one was a super interesting, funny, fun story of an actual time in World War II when the Germans and the Americans fought together. So this was basically as the war was coming down to an end, and I'm going to oversimplify it as Wendigoon did in his video, as it's a little more complex than this. But basically the regular German soldiers weren't seen as being as bad as the Waffen SS, which is basically like the Nazi soldiers. So towards the end of the war, there was this castle in France, which was at the time occupied by Germany. And this castle was basically a prison that housed a bunch of French celebrities. Whether these were rich people, ex-sports stars, or ex-prime ministers. It was just a bunch of important French people, basically. Now, as I said, the war was coming down to an end. Germany was losing, and the writing was kind of on the wall for anyone in the German army. So the German soldiers basically wanted to defend and even free the French celebrities from this castle, and the Waffen SS were more hardcore and they wanted to keep control of the castle until Germany officially was like forced out basically, and they maybe potentially even wanted to just kill everyone in the castle as they had done in some camps prior. So when American troops came over, they basically teamed up with the German military in order to defend this castle from the Waffen SS German soldiers. So yeah, as I said, pretty wild story, but that is one of the only times in the war where Germany and America fought together side by side, and it is a pretty interesting video, so it is going up into the S tier. The Devil's Story of Eden, Paradise Lost Explained. So this covers the story of the Garden of Eden as told from the devil's perspective. And this was all written by an English poet named John Milton in 1667. It explains how the devil tempted Adam and Eve and how that made them essentially lose paradise, hence Paradise Lost. A pretty interesting story if you're into biblical stuff or into the biblical lore, as it gives us some, I guess, non-canon, technically biblical story lore. The artwork and illustrations that come with it are honestly pretty decent and pretty cool, but I think the whole story being limited to just the Bible somewhat limits the reach of this video. It is also almost 2 hours long, which is fantastic if you love it and not so fantastic if you don't love it. So I will be placing this into the B tier. A Maze of Terror, the Backroom series explained. Now, this is what I live for. So, The Backrooms is this alternate horror series that you can find yourself in if you fall out of reality. So, that doesn't make much sense, I understand. But in this first video, someone kind of stumbles, falls backwards, and when you fall, I don't know where you have to be or what triggers it, but you can basically fall out of this reality, like a glitch almost, and fall into these back rooms. Now this is like a whole separate reality, and it's depicted by these large, empty, yellow, glowing corridors that at first seem a little somewhat normal, but the further and further you get into it, the more abstract and strange and creepy they get. Then there's also the fucking creatures that are following and stalking these people around the back rooms. So honestly, I absolutely loved this video, and I did a mini deep dive into the Backroom series immediately after I finished watching it, and it is something that I am definitely considering covering on this channel, as it is just one hell of a fantastic, awesome, very scary series. And so, shouldn't come as a surprise that this is going all the way up into the Wendigoon tier. The Mystery of Vincent van Gogh's Death. Now, why am I pronouncing Gogh like that? Why not Van Gogh or Van Gogh? Because those are inaccurate, and I must strive for completely accurate local pronunciations of names, even though no sane person does. Anyway, this man's life was tragic, magical, depressing, beautiful, unique. He really lived one hell of a life when you look into his story. He is regarded now as one of the greatest painters and artists to ever live, even though in his own lifetime he only sold 1 out of the 900 paintings that he did. So there's such an extreme contrast. We know him as one of the greatest of all time, yet he died thinking that he was basically just a complete failure. He died of a gunshot wound to the abdomen, and it was widely believed that he did it to himself, but there have been some recent theories that say potentially someone else did it to him, and he was again potentially just being super kind, where he knew he was going to die, but he didn't want the other person to get in trouble for it, so he lied. A super interesting short coverage of a super cool and beautiful person, and this is going up in the A tier. Frankenstein, the original horror story. So as you may have noticed from my previous judgments about these videos, I super love topics that everyone knows of but not about. And the Frankenstein story, I think, definitely fits into that. The original story is honestly quite a masterpiece, especially for the time, and by author Mary Shelley. And this was all the way back in 1818. This video is basically a book review of the original story, and I think Wendigoon does does a fantastic job of covering it. So this will be going into the S tier. The most disturbing black and white movie ever made. This is a review basically and a covering and exploration of the film All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a very dark, horrific war film or war story covering this 18-year-old kid who goes to war in World War I. He's kind of excited to go. He's going with some of his childhood friends. They're, you know, pumped up. They want to go. They want to fight for their country. They head out. And then slowly throughout the film, things just get darker and darker and more sad. And the story is centered around this main 18-year-old character, Paul. His friends and people that he knows and cares about slowly get injured. They die off. At one point, he actually heads back to his town and finds some more bad news, and also finds that some of the older men in the town aren't really taking this war seriously, even though Paul has just basically gone to hell and back in just a short while of being in the war and in the trenches. I won't spoil too much of the ending, but the tagline of the film is "They left as boys, never to return as men," which is pretty poignant and pretty dark. But I am normally a massive fan of these dark war films because honestly, a lot of the time they're not really intentionally dark. They're just transparent and honest about the brutalities and horrors of war. And a lot of the time, the psychological and mental damage from the war is more brutal and horrific than the physical damage from it. So a great film and story, and a great coverage of that film and story. So this will be going into the S tier. That time, the CIA faked a vampire attack to take over a country. This story and video is wild. And the basic premise is after World War II, there was like a mad scramble for a bunch of the countries in Asia. And this fight was basically between the communist countries of Russia and China versus the democratic countries of America and of stuff like Western Europe. And this fight and struggle for power is essentially why you had wars and proxy wars, such as Vietnam and the Korean Wars. But this particular video covers the strange case of when America was fighting for power in the Philippines, and as well as regular warfare techniques, they used a bunch of psychological and mental warfare, and included in that psychological warfare was spreading rumors of stuff like vampire attacks to clear out certain areas and villages. So they basically faked vampire attacks in order to make their military advances stronger and to secure their takeover of the Philippines. So yeah, as I said, pretty wild story, pretty wild video. It's a bit of fun. It's only 25 minutes long, so this will sit comfortably in the A tier. The darkest story I've ever read. This video covers the horror story of No Longer Human, which is written by the author Osamu Dazai and has a manga adaptation written by Junji Ito. It's this weird kind of abstract horror story that honestly didn't really click too well with me. I actually found myself getting bored by this video quite a bit, which honestly hasn't happened in a while for these Wendigoon videos. And so something else that hasn't happened in a while is this will go into the C tier. I am incredibly sorry, Wendigoon. It had to be done. YouTube's Scariest Videos Charity Challenge with Mr. GG. So this is another collab video with Mr. GG. They watch scary stuff. If they get scared, they donate to charity. Pretty simple concept, but I am, as you know, personally not a huge fan of these videos. So this will go all the way down into the F tier. The Haunting Mystery of the Brown Mountain Lights. Can I just say that this video's thumbnail is honestly a work of beauty. It's like an art piece. The colors, the lighting, the font, the layout. Mwah. But the video itself is kind of strange. It's like a mixture of the fireside kind of plot type of story that we are used to with Wendigoon's videos, but he also has like live parts where he actually goes out into the mountains to try and find out what these lights are. It's a bit kind of strange and off the cuff. For me, it doesn't really land too well, as I do always prefer his heavily researched, somewhat scripted videos. So this will sadly again go into the C tier. The controversial Missing Children Milk Carton program is just great. And once again, if you can see a trend, this is a topic that I think a lot of people know of, but not too much about. And I don't know how many times I'm gonna have to repeat that. I watched this video a while back, and it actually led to me doing a deeper dive into the milk carton program, and it is some super fascinating stuff. How and why the program started, what problems it had, the actual success rate of the missing kids put onto the carton, and why the whole thing ended up being cancelled and shut down. All of that is covered in this Wendigoon video. So I will be placing this into the S tier. The Lost Books of the Bible. So this was a very, very interesting one. As many of you might know, the Bible isn't just one book, but rather it's like a collection of books. For instance, you have the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Wendigoon, which is a lesser known Bible gospel. But anyway, you have all of these scripts and books and stories all throughout the ancient world, and the people who made the Bible, quite often the church, were basically in charge of gathering these sources and books, determining what was necessary and what was important, especially to the story of Jesus and the Bible and God and Christianity, and compiling that all into one book that we now call the Bible. So you can imagine there was a ton of material made originally, and a bunch of it didn't quite make the cut. If you want something super interesting, do some research into the Dead Sea Scrolls, which aren't covered in this Wendigoon video, but that is a super interesting topic that I myself have dived into quite a bit. But in this video, Wendigoon does cover some of the lost materials that could have potentially gone in the Bible, but that weren't included. It's a pretty interesting one, and I think if you are super into the lore of the Bible, this may very well be a Wendigoon tier level video, but for now I'll be placing it into the S tier. Exploring an abandoned nuclear power plant is basically Wendigoon exploring live an abandoned power plant. There's not much else to it really. I don't know why I just repeated the title, but yeah, not a huge fan of these live videos. They're a little fun and a little silly and not too serious, but I don't really learn anything from them. They're not super informative, so this will honestly be going down into the D tier. The unexplainable disappearance of Dennis Martin, missing 411. What is with these live videos? As this case covers another missing 411 case, it is essentially another collaboration video with the Law Lodge. And frankly, I love the Law Lodge. Don't get me wrong, but this just feels like a different video than the classic Wendigoon sit down in front of a desk, 2 hours of creepy story with intense and deep research. It's just not that sort of video. So Wendigoon and Law Lodge basically go on a hike of the area that Dennis went missing, while telling essentially Dennis's story and exploring that sort of theme. Dennis was a kid who went missing in 1969, who I actually covered in one of my earlier iceberg videos. It's a different style video, but it covers a fairly interesting disappearance, so this will go into the C tier. The Mandela Revelations. So this is the third video covering the Mandela catalog, and it continues to explore and cover a bunch of the lore that is within the Mandela universe. This one is 2 hours long. The story, I think, is just as great as the previous one. The filming and editing quality has actually improved. The thumbnail is super on point, super cool and creepy looking, and this was a very, very honestly difficult decision, but I think personally it didn't quite make the Wendigoon tier, so it will go into the S tier, but it is honestly very close. Bump. Skinamarink Explained, a Forgotten Nightmare. So this covers Skinamarink, which is another one of these creepy, eerie horrors that I do so love. So you can probably already tell where I'm going to place this video. It's disturbing, it's creepy, it's horrific, and it's subtle in a very, very good way. It is everything that I now love thanks to Wendigoon about these horror series, and I would highly, highly recommend checking out the original Skinamarink videos, if not just Wendigoon's coverage of them. Oh, and the thumbnail is absolutely gorgeous. Wendigoon tier. The Mystery of the Bomb Collar Bank Heist. Also, it should be said that from here on out, pretty much every thumbnail in his videos is super on point, artistic, beautiful. And again, I don't know if Wendigoon makes them himself or if he has someone making them for him, but they are absolutely gorgeous. This video covers the very shocking, very strange case of a pizza delivery driver that delivered pizza to a house, then got taken hostage, strapped with a bomb, and was made to walk into a bank and and basically rob the bank, which honestly to me just sounds like the plot to a Die Hard film or something, but this was a real case that really happened. It involved heartbreak, tragedy, triumph, and conspiracy, but it was a very fascinating, edge-of-your-seat kind of case, and I think Wendigoon covered it extremely well, so this is going up in the Wendigoon tier. The bizarre death of Gloria Ramirez, the Toxic Lady incident. This video covers the case and death of Gloria Ramirez, who I actually covered in a previous episode of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg, but it was basically this woman who went into hospital, and all of the doctors and hospital workers that were near her basically became extremely sick, collapsed, fainted, had to be hospitalized themselves, and at first they couldn't quite work out what Gloria had infected them with. It was a very strange case, but it's a very short case, and there's not too much to go off, but if I'm honest, wasn't my favorite video, so this will be going into the B tier. The Devil vs. Jesus, the Battle of Paradise Regained, Explained. So this is a lesser known follow-up book to Paradise Lost, which Wendigoon previously covered in one of his earlier videos. And it explores the story of Paradise Regained, where in the original, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve essentially lose paradise. But through his battle with the devil, essentially, Jesus regains paradise for his followers. And that is the whole idea of if you believe and have faith in Jesus, then you can essentially have paradise once again, even after it was lost by Adam and Eve. It's a cool story and follow-up to the original, especially if you're interested in Bible stuff. So for me, this will be going into the A tier. The most painful death ever, viewer discretion. This case is almost a thing of legends. Hisashi Uchi was a nuclear fuel plant worker in Tokaimura, Japan, who, along with 2 other workers, accidentally spilled enriched uranium oxide and were subject to ungodly amounts of radiation. Hisashi, who was the closest to the spillage, was exposed to the most amount of radiation, more than any other person in history ever recorded, and the other 2, who were further away, were still exposed to a lot, but nowhere near the amount of Hisashi. And after a delay, Hisashi predictably fell ill from the radiation. He was immediately rushed to the hospital, and the next 83 days were filled with hope, miracles, torture, pain, and heartbreak. So as soon as the accident happened, the doctors basically knew immediately what they would be facing in the next few days. And so they gathered to the best of their abilities all of the best doctors and carers that they could find, and went to work on trying to manage Hisashi's illness and condition and try to somehow potentially save him. When his skin died, they got skin grafts. When his organs failed, they revived them repeatedly, or if they weren't able to revive them, they were able to essentially replicate them. So if his lungs stopped working, they would hook him up to a respirator to sort of breathe for him. And during this time, they honestly performed some absolute medical miracles just in order to keep him alive. Like, it was absolutely fantastic work what they were doing. He suffered 3 heart attacks while in the hospital, and each time he was revived. Now, the whole dark side of this case is that while the doctors and family were keeping him alive, he was basically in an extreme state of uncomfort and pain, as you would be dying from radiation poisoning for 83 days. So there's one side of belief that says that the doctors were essentially performing miracles. They were doing their absolute best to try and save Hisashi and make him comfortable, and the family was supporting him the entire way. And then there's the other side that says that the doctors were essentially just keeping him alive to basically experiment on him, as they had never really had anyone with this amount of radiation, so they were doing tests on him and to see how it affected the body. And there's that side of it, and that the family was keeping him alive for selfish reasons and weren't doing what was best for Hisashi. But I don't tend to buy into that second theory. I think doctors will do almost anything to keep people alive as a default, and the family of course want their loved ones to survive through this horrible ordeal. There's nothing necessarily evil about that. And there's the fact that Hisashi himself said that he wanted to live and he wanted to make it through this. So I'm fully on the side of the doctors on this one. Hisashi eventually died of organ failure after almost 3 months in agonizing pain and discomfort, and now I am sad. A tragic case, but a great coverage of it. So Wendy, this is going into the S tier. The greatest terrible book ever made. The story too disturbing to be a movie, Blood Meridian. Oh boy, this is a long one. A 5-hour long book review. One of the most horrific, bloody, brutal books ever written. Great stuff. Blood Meridian is honestly, and I don't use this word lightly, traumatizing. But that is kind of the point of the book. The story is set in the Wild West and basically explores the topic of human evil. So in the book are scenes of every type of evil you can imagine. And I can't show you these scenes or topics or even talk about them, but just imagine what the worst people in the world go to prison for. You know, the prisoners that even murderers despise. That sort of stuff is in the book, as well as abuse against women, against animals, just incredibly violent, horrific scenes. And so you can see kind of why the point is made that it will never be made into a film. If you did make it into a film and film all of the scenes, it might very well just be an illegal film. But if you left out a bunch of the scenes, then you wouldn't really be doing the book justice. So it's like a catch-22. It is a very, very dark book and story, but it's written like that on purpose. The point is that whether we like or are comfortable with these evil, horrific scenes or not, evil people will still perform them. And so we can say this is too dark to be in a book or a story, or no one should write about this. But when it actually happens in real life, we are just not prepared for it. So the point of the book is to explore these sorts of things and to be aware of their existence and of the existence of extremely evil people. To know your enemy in a way. There's some very good stuff in this one. The story is insane, somewhat traumatizing, and Wendigoon has a weird green screen sort of setup here, which I honestly really don't like, but we are still going to place this all the way up in the S tier. It is a hell of a journey if you ever do get around to watching the entire video. The forbidden practice of self-mummification. So this explores the rare Buddhist practice of mummifying yourself while you're still alive, which sounds uncomfortable to say the least, and horrifying to say the most. This particular ancient process took around 8 years to do, and I won't get any more into it because it probably will get taken down from YouTube, but feel free to look it up if you want, if you have some morbid curiosity or something. But a bunch of these mummies that are now found are hundreds of years old, as this practice has been banned in Japan since 1879. Pretty wild fact, pretty interesting case, going into the B tier. The deal with the devil that created rock and roll. Demonic Tales and Robert Johnson. So this is one of the more light-hearted videos that Wendigoon's made in recent times, which is always nice. It's a little refreshing, and especially coming off the back of stuff like Blood Meridian, it feels like a bit of fresh air. So Wendigoon explores the guitarist of Robert Johnson, who some would say is the father of rock and roll. He was so damn good at music and inventing rock and roll almost as we see it today that a bunch of people accused him of making a deal with the devil and of trading his soul in exchange for his musical abilities, which honestly is one hell of a compliment. If they say you are so good that the only way you could have gotten that good is by literally selling your soul to the devil, I don't know, that's kind of an ego boost. Unless of course you did make a deal with the devil and then you'll just say, yeah, I made a deal with the devil. But I'm assuming that he didn't actually make a deal with the devil. I like these old America-style-y stories and videos, and this fits right into it, so I will be placing it into the A tier. The most disturbing human experiment ever. What was that I said about light-hearted videos? Yeah, never mind. This video covers, in my opinion, as well as Wendigoon's opinion, as well as many, many other people's opinions, the most disturbing and messed up set of experiments ever conducted. And if you want to be traumatized, go research Unit 731. But you have been warned. This was a Japanese unit in China in the 1930s and 40s that, among other things, was testing and experimenting with biological and chemical warfare, and often did these tests on prisoners, including women and children. These experiments were horrific, and as I think everyone should always be made aware of evils in the world, I will place this in the must-watch tier, which is the Wendigoon tier. The disturbing and controversial video games iceberg. Oh hey, we're back to icebergs now. That's fun. This was a very fun and refreshing one, back to the old school style of thumbnails that Wendigoon used to do. And it is honestly very refreshing to see him doing a iceberg after so long. It's nice to see him covering a lot of different topics in one video. And this would be going into the S tier if I were a little more interested in the topic material. But sadly, I'm not too interested in these scary and controversial video games. So sadly, this will have to go into the A tier. The scariest disappearance I've ever covered, the Yuba County 5. Boy, oh boy, this case. I myself covered it in one of the iceberg videos that I did and got a lot of requests to cover it more in depth, which I will do in a future video sometime. Maybe even next week if this video gets like 200 likes. This was a wild case, and you can see why there is a lot of attention around it and a lot of demand for the telling of this story. Basically, a group of these 5 mentally challenged men went for a drive and decided to drive up this mountain into the woods, abandon their car in the wintertime, and most of them were found dead and one was never found. Now, of the people that were found dead, some of them were found outside in the wilderness, seemingly dying of hypothermia or of exposure to the elements, but some were found dead in and around this survival cabin, and the survival cabin was basically made for this purpose, to house and support and provide safety for people stuck out in the wilderness. One of them died seemingly of starvation, even though the cabin was filled with food. The cabin was filled with supplies, food, water. It had gasoline enough to make a fire and to keep a fire going, and it had winter coats and jackets, but none of them were ever used. It's a very strange, interesting case with a few different theories about who else or what else might have been involved in this case, and it is not straightforward at all. On top of that, as you know, I love thumbnails, and this thumbnail is on point. So this will be going up into the, not the S tier, into the Wendigoon tier. The Monsters Beyond Us, the Monument Mythos, or Mythos. Mythos? Mythos? Mythos, I think. The Monument Mythos. This continues the coverage of the Monument Mythos, which I am just absolutely in love with. It's an alternate reality or history where James Dean gets elected president, MLK is still alive, and there are these giant monsters, cryptids, creatures, sorts of things that live in, around, and underneath various monuments throughout America. Stuff like the Statue of Liberty, the Lincoln Memorial, and Mount Rushmore. A fantastic series that I am absolutely digging, and Wendigoon does it complete justice, so this will be going up in the Wendigoon tier. The game Too Scary for 3D, The Hidden Story of Faith, The Unholy Trilogy. This video is just a masterpiece. It is 4.5 hours long, is a 2D pixel game, which I personally just have always loved the aesthetic of. It's creepy and cryptic, reminding me a lot of these analog horrors that I am so infatuated with, or infatuated by. The thumbnail for this one is just super cool, and very accurately, I think, represents the game as a whole. So this one is quite an easy decision. This is going up into the Wendigoon tier. The Total Nightmare of the Mandela Catalog Explained. This one is basically just a supercut of the last 3 Mandela videos, minus of course the intros, the outros, the ads, and any wrong information that Wendigoon had in those videos. This is great if you'd like to watch the entire thing uninterrupted with a few corrections, but it still doesn't add really too much as it is just a supercut, so I will be placing this up in the A tier. And we are down to one video in this tier list left, which is the internet's favorite T asterisk Rorist, which there must be a reason why he's put the asterisk in there, so I'm gonna follow Wendigoon's lead on this one and censor it myself as well. This video explores Ted Kaczynski, a math prodigy turned serial bomber, who is probably better known as the Unabomber. This video goes through his childhood and everything leading up to his attacks, and the 17 years that he was randomly bombing places while being hunted by the US government. A very interesting, wild, and disturbing disturbed individual and a pretty peculiar and shocking case. And if you like videos about killers, this is probably right up your street. And the impression I got of him was sort of like an evil version of Chris McCandless from the Man Who Walked Off the Face of the Earth video. He wanted to destroy industrialization, technology, and society to an extent, and was, I think, a very troubled individual. But as always, Wendigoon does a fantastic job of covering this. He goes very in depth. It is over 3.5 hours long, and so this final video is going all the way up into the Wendigoon tier. There is also a more recent video that is not on this tier list, which is the best and worst of analog horror. Greylock vs Urban Spook. Scary vs disturbing. It's 2.5 hours long, goes over and explores these two different analog horrors, and lists out basically the pros and cons of each one, and goes into a bit of the individual style of each one. It's a pretty great meta review of analog horrors and horrors as a whole, but I think one of the downsides to these meta explorations and reviews is that you don't really get to comfortably sit and dive deep into one particular horror. It's kind of split between the other, as well as between a bird's eye view of kind of both of them and the meta commentary. And I think that deep immersion is one of the most important factors for these horrors. So while it is a great video and it is not on the tier list, I think I'd place it somewhere between the A and B tier, though most likely my gut is saying to place it into the A tier. Boy, that was a lot of videos. And honestly, I learned a lot more than I thought I would learn before I started this. And even from this view, all of the tiers aren't even visible. So I'd need to zoom out even more, something like that, to get them all in view. So I think I'm pretty happy with how all of the tiers ended up filling out. And obviously you can probably tell where my preferences lie with these video styles. The F tier just tends to be either live videos, which include stuff like his Bible videos and charity streams, and even stuff like his video game videos, which from what I can tell are basically live commentaries where Wendigoon's just riffing ideas. And don't get me wrong, Wendigoon is a fantastic storyteller, and the ideas he's riffing about I found really interesting even in the video game videos. But I think the problem for me is when you finish the video, you're not really left with any massive insights or cool facts or stories about anything. And so I think for me, that is where I rank the highest videos, where when you finish the video, you're either super emotionally affected, like with some of the analog horrors, or you just have a really cool story to tell other people or to remember for yourself in stuff like The Man Who Walked Off the Earth or The Back Rooms. And there was, I feel, a little trend, especially towards the end, that you might have been able to tell, in that a lot of his early videos went in the bottom half of the tier. It was honestly quite a while before we got one video in the Wendigoon tier, and towards the end there were just Wendigoon after Wendigoon after Wendigoon tier videos, which just goes to show that, in my opinion, Wendigoon is massively improving at an exponential rate, and I honestly can't wait to see what future videos he comes up with and what future topics he decides to explore. But Wendigoon is someone that I massively aspire to be like. I've always been interested in storytelling, in finding out and exploring and discovering really cool facts and stories, and so the variety of videos on Wendigoon's channel has definitely inspired me to explore a wider range of topics, and I'm incredibly thankful for Wendigoon and his fantastic videos. And that being said, I would love to know what Wendigoon is drinking down in the comments below, on the off chance that he ever even sees this video. But a man can dream. And as always, thanks for watching.